Welcome to Why Knowledge Matters. Welcome, Professor Ghosh. We are very happy and excited to have you here on our show today. And I hope you are doing well despite the very difficult circumstances.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Yes, I'm doing okay. Just taking it day by day, but hoping that one day this will, not in the not too distant future, this will be over. This difficult period will be over for sure.
Absolutely. And today it's really exciting. You will be talking about the emerging area of education and security. Now, could you explain us or define what the emerging area of security and education means?
Okay, I'm going to be defining security a little later on, but just to tell you that at this particular moment in the pandemic, we can think of security we usually think of security in personal terms, like a personal threat, but security really means, which I will come to later, it involves many things, economic, social, but at the moment, it is the health security that is the problem. People's health is not secure, it's not safe. To a security threat is a safety threat. So how is it that it's involved with education? Because it involves behaviors and attitudes. And it's a developmental thing that we have to teach students how to think critically. For example, in this pandemic, we have to see that if I don't take the vaccine, it may not matter to me, but it may matter to someone else because I'm carrying the vaccine, the virus, and may infect someone else. Or if I don't wear a mask, it may not matter to you, but it may matter to somebody else whom I will infect. So it's important that we understand the interdependence of people and of things, and that we have to learn particularly in individualized cultures like North America, where people think of themselves more than of society. You must think of community, you must think of the society, you must think of your nation, and you must think of your role, your nation's role in the world. Because you can, if one person is infected, nobody is safe. That is why they're so worried about India right now, because because if everybody is fine and vaccinated, it's fine. But if India is not, then it's going to be a big problem for the rest of the world. So everybody is interested in seeing that the world is safe, and the world is safe, that means security. But I'm going to talk specifically of another type of security, and that is extremism. Because the global proliferation of violent events that is motivated by extremism is raising concerns in all parts of society, national, local, community, and international. It has implications also for personal security. This threat permeates all sovereign borders, and it is not a phenomenon that only happens in the non-Western world, the extremism. Almost daily, people in Canada and the US and other Western countries are actively involved in terrorist-related activities. An increase in violent activities means that youth are involved in extremist behavior. And in school, we teach people how to behave, how to react to certain things. And that is why education is concerned with security. Now, extremism, which means that when you do not allow for a different point of view, when you hold your own views as being quite exclusive and you reject other people's perspectives, that's extremism. Extremism may involve only a few students, yet its impact is far and wide. Canada has had few terrorist incidences, not that many, and it is also share of violence in schools, shootings and so on and so forth, bullying. But we think of extremism in North America in particular, we think of it as Islamic terrorism because of what happened with ISIS and because of the global reach of ISIS. But actually people don't know, most people don't know, that the immediate threat, which has been going for some time, both in Canada and the US, is right-wing, white supremacist national group terrorism. They have been doing a lot of things which we don't hear about because they have not been defined by the nation state as terrorist groups until very recently in the United States, and even just a few years ago in Canada. So the most susceptible people who adopt these extremist ideologies are young people around the ages of 15 to 25, who are at a developmental age and they're seeking to uncover who they really are. They're looking for confidence within themselves, and they are in search of meaning in their lives. This age group is very action-oriented and is usually characterized by higher risk-taking as well. So, given the dominant role of schools as social institutions where students spend a substantial number of hours each day, the role of education in the development of a peaceful and inclusive society is significant. But institutions cannot work alone. They need to work with the school personnel, with parents, with the community. And education is only one tool in countering terrorism, but it has much potential, and the power of education in complementing counter-terrorism policies can be very significant because unlike other things like policing and military action, which looks at what has happened, it's reactive. Education is proactive and it goes to the root causes that give rise to the radicalization that leads to terrorism. And right now we are under threat after what happened in the US, in the Congress, US Congress. People are really scared of what is happening with white nationalist supremacists. But these are people who have gone to our schools. They have gone through the school system and they have developed a state of mind which led them to do this. And this is what I'm looking at. My work suggests that education can play a significant role in countering terrorism, and especially in the development of radicalization. And by radicalization, I mean extreme positions which are taken by students as they grow up and are justified on moral grounds. That's the stage of radicalism, when they are justifying their thoughts, their extremist views on moral grounds. That is radicalization. And sometimes it leads to terrorism, not always. But this has not been a hotly debated and hotly discussed topic within education, because radicalization implies attitudes that contradict a set of values and beliefs that are typical of a particular society. Education is really a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, terrorist groups have used education to promote extremist ideologies, and they use social media and the internet to recruit students at all levels of education with psychological, intellectual, and emotional appeal, which is called soft power. They're appealing through soft power. So education can be used to indoctrinate people, and there are schools that ISIS had for them to become radicalized, and most importantly, to morally justify their violent acts. That's the difference between an ordinary crime and terrorist act. On the other hand, education can be used to promote critical individual development for the good of the individual, for the good of the nation, and resilience to counter extremist ideology. That no, I don't believe in something like that violence. But it is important to remember that, firstly, a wrong approach can be very bad. A wrong approach in education can have the opposite effects, and simply to access education is not enough, because we need to have critical thinking and multiple perspectives. We don't want to indoctrinate them, because it would be just the opposite of what we want. We want thinking people who can think for themselves. Problem is that despite a tremendous increase in cost and efforts towards countering terrorism, terrorist attacks have grown. And I have figures for 2007, between 2007 and 2013, they have grown by 300% during that period. So now it is much more. Yet despite these investments, more and more young people are being radicalized. So I have argued in my work that the emphasis in Canadian counter-terrorism policies and programs thus far have been reactive rather than proactive, so that they have focused on policing, on intelligence work, and on military hard power, rather than the soft power of behavior and emotions of people and attitudes of people. Since this radicalization, becoming radicalized, is a transformative behavior, it is involved in steps to extremism. I suggest that emphasis should be put on children from the time they enter school, so as to develop in them values, skills, and behaviors that would be conducive to a peaceful and dynamic society. And this would mean that curriculum content, teaching methodology have to be changed. And most importantly, teacher education programs have to be aware of this, because students need to develop a critical understanding of the world, so that some of the triggers, the push and pull factors that send them to the dangerous path towards radicalization, is preempted, so that we are proactive, we preempt them in school, so that then they never develop. That is why programs are hard to measure, because we are preempting something, so we don't know how successful we are. The idea is not to have security concerns as educational goals, nor is it to propose particular prevention protocols. But because different contexts and different educational systems exist in the world, we would just like to suggest some common guidelines on which educational institutions could focus, And on the one hand, that would prevent attraction to antisocial activities such as gangs and bullying and extremism. And on the other hand, it would promote resilience in students through critical global citizenship. Most of the proactive and preventive measures have to be carefully designed. And we do not want what the UK has, which is called Prevent 2015, which is to monitor and detect early signs of radicalization in students in the classroom, even as small as in kindergarten. They're told to see, do you see early signs of radicalization? In France also, they have something like that. And these target and stereotype certain students and certain groups. So we don't want something like that. Now, radicalization is interesting because in itself is not a bad thing. It is the violence that is associated with it that is the problem. Violence is not limited, of course, to committing the violent act itself, but it's also involves people who are in the planning and the recruiting of individuals who are going to do these violent acts. Many great men and women have been radicals. For example, Malala. We've all heard of Malala when she got the Nobel Prize. She challenged the Taliban on women's and girls' right to education. Then there is Mahatma Gandhi, who challenged British colonialism. Martin Luther King, who challenged Black segregation. So these people all achieved their goals in peaceful ways. They were radicals because they challenged something that was the norm and which they thought was unfair and unjust. Malala thought that refusing girls was unjust. Gandhi thought that British should not colonize another country. That was unjust. Martin Luther King thought that segregating Black and whites was not the right thing. So that was unjust. But they achieved their ends through peaceful means. And it just means challenging the status quo. To be a radical is to challenge the status quo. So by itself, it need not be bad. But in order to provide a context, maybe I should talk a little bit about the Canadian framework that puts legislation for social justice as the basis of a peaceful society in Canada.
There are several questions. First and foremost, what you just touched is critical. However, we see, for example, also within Quebec that actually political leaders go the opposite direction. For example, ethics and religious culture program is actually put into questions not very recently. So what do you think why this is that things that ought to help prevent radicalization, not necessarily radicalization, but extremism and terrorism, as you just pointed out, is actually abundant?
That's a very good question. And the reason for that is that, well, first of all, I want to say that they want to replace the ERC program, not completely cut it out. They want to replace it with more. What they want to cut out is the religious cultures part of it, because Quebec sees itself as a very secular country, a secular state, and it does not want to have any religion in the classroom, even religious cultures. But I think it also depends upon what kind of party is in power. If it's a rightist party, it will be different from a more liberal party. So there are two things in Quebec. So it's a party, but it's also the fight for secularism, the need to impose secularism, which has led to the bills which are preventing minorities from wearing, minority religious groups from wearing their their religious symbols. So in Quebec, it's a different dynamic. That is why it's important for people to understand that if they want to have a peace in society, they will have to have something to teach students. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on. What are the goals of education should be? And we can talk about that.
You were mentioning radicalization, and it can lead up to terrorism, which is obviously extremely troubling. Now, is there signs that people are looking for something in order to gain some relevance or meaning in their lives? Or is it just that there are some groups that try to convince some people to act atrocities on their behalf? What do you think? Why is this that there is an increase in radicalization, but also to some extent in terrorism, as you just mentioned, when you mentioned between 2007 and 2014?
Yeah. Okay, so there are push factors and there are pull factors. And here is where the school can do a lot. Because the literature shows, and I did with my graduate students a very large study. The first one that we did was in 2016, which was the first literature survey of education and extremism. And we found that there were certain pull factors and push factors. And the push factors are the ones that both are related to the school, and where the school can do a lot, as they can have a significant impact, because they both marginalize students and there are ways that entice students. Okay, so there are individual level factors. And these individual level factors are perceived threats to personal and collective identities. So that if you think somebody is insulting me or my religion or my group or my religious group, then it results in alienation and humiliation, leading to hatred and anger. And this is very important because when it leads to alienation and humiliation, it has harmful effects on the student's behavior as well as their level of achievement, but it also makes students feel that they don't belong and they look for something where they might belong. So it's something that's pushing them away, that somebody hates my religion, hates me. I'm going to go away from here and go where I'm liked. People like to be liked. So that's one thing, a perceived threat. And we need to pay attention to people's religious, ethnic, and cultural differences. We need to validate their identities. And we need to make classrooms safe from racism and sexism and all the isms that discriminatory, prejudices and discriminatory behavior. These are the basic tenets of a multicultural pedagogy, critical multicultural pedagogy, that you will include everyone, make everybody feel you belong. And that is where the school is very, very important. Then there are personal factors, such as boredom or lack of challenge in life. Particularly people who have grown up in financially secure and materially comfortable environments often find there's no challenge to life. So they look for something exciting, something different, an adventure. And in Western countries, but in upper class sections of developing countries, the countries of the South, people are looking for a challenge. So it is very important that in schools, we give them that challenge. We need to keep students motivated and curious all the time, so that they don't go looking for challenge somewhere else. We need to challenge them and channel their energies into exciting, innovative, and creative paths through our methods of teaching, so that we can engage them and encourage them to be innovative, engage them in constructing their own knowledge. Then experiences of personal tragedy trigger oppositional behavior. Quite often, we've seen that if you look at the lives of some of the people who have been terrorists, you'll find that they've had a personal tragedy, like a loss of a parent, particularly the mother, or someone very dear to them. It triggered off oppositional behavior in school, and then they get detached from school, and then they become easy prey to people who are trying to recruit them. The teachers and the right peer group, because they could fall with the wrong peer group, of course, but the right peer group and the teachers, the school environment can do much to help people in students like that times of need. Then there is the call for revenge on Western nations that has been happening, that are seen to be guilty of doing wrong to others. The history. So the schools, the one big problem in the school systems in the West is that they have one version of history, which is Eurocentric point of view, and they totally disregard other points of view. And they do not give us a balanced history of the world. I mean, it's good to learn the history of Quebec, but how is that related to the rest of the world? Why are we having these problems? And these are very severe problems. We do not have a good history curriculum in any of the schools. A history which includes slavery, colonialism, imperialism, how inequalities among and within nations and societies have been created. Students don't know that. They don't know what colonialism did to the countries of the South. Why are they impoverished now? Because because of histories of colonialism and what happened after that. So several factors. So these are where schools can help. Then there are several factors at the community and societal level. And this is discrimination and segregation and bullying, marginalization from mainstream society. And this kind of rejection of people by discriminating against them in, like when you go to rent an apartment, you won't give it to me because I'm not white, that kind of thing. Excluding people rather than inclusive society. This is, and what Charles Taylor has called being misrecognized or not recognized, unrecognized. This has tremendous impact on a person's identity and self-concept. And so these are things that trigger violence for retribution, for some kind of revenge. And so that when things like this happen, when there's an incident that happens, very often teachers try not to discuss them because they feel that the parents may not like it, or they don't know enough about it, and so they just don't even discuss these controversial topics. If there's a big thing like that happened in the US in the Congress, a big event like that, if they don't discuss that, the children will hear about it. They will see it on TV. But what are the reasons, how it happened? This kind of discussion should go on with the teacher. Teachers must discuss controversial topics and allow different points of view, allow students to say what they think and what they know, and then reason with them to see why did they come to that. Teachers have great impact on identity development because identity is formed in relationships with the peer group and the teachers. And radicalization is one way of reasserting their identities. So when they feel that they don't feel good about themselves, they want to do something that is not, that's antisocial. Then, of course, there is technology and the media, which has global reach and decentralized. They come from anywhere. The spread of propaganda through recruitment, very flexible and mobile networks. And it's very interesting that they are multilingual in character now. All these networks, all the digital things are multilingual. And they can reach people not only in their region, but in the diaspora, in the world diaspora. So it's very important that we teach our students media literacy skills. It's not only enough to evaluate the information, that is, know which is the fake news, but they must have the capacity to rebut a challenge and somebody who's trying to attract them with emotional narratives. Educational programs need to have narratives that can appeal to the students emotionally to keep them engaged with critical, innovative ideas, that so that they have a need to go and probe further into the discussions. They need to engage in multiple identities and discussion of multiple identities, how they can look at multiple perspectives, not one perspective. Then, of course, there are the pull factors. Those were the push factors. The pull factors, when a person is already marginalized and feels lonely and doesn't feel wanted, the promise of a new family, new friends who will look out for them and who are telling them that you are in the West, which is the source of evil and immorality and inequality, and they think of you as racially inferior. Why are you staying there? Come away to us. Come away with us. Network of people to instigate, convince vulnerable youth to commit crimes. Now, this is also happening with the white nationalists, that these immigrants are coming, they're taking away our jobs, they're racially inferior to us, but they're taking away our jobs. Our land is becoming brown or black. And are you going to stand for that? Of course not. Let's come and join us and we will help you fight this kind of immigration. So these are some of the factors that push and pull people, but they use a lot of recruitment tools which emotionally appeal to the people, to the youth, and then they go into a gang or something. And then once they go in there, it's very difficult to get out of it because they become very dependent on them. So this is an answer to your question about how they get into these acts.
Now, what you just mentioned is also, to some extent, there is also a collective fear, especially when it comes to educators. And, there has been some cases actually in the recent past where, educators said something and they had a huge backlash. So educators in general are put in a very difficult position, let alone what happened, for example, in France, where a teacher tried to address or, at least discuss a certain topic and then got brutally
Yeah, but
murdered.
that's a very interesting case, and I'm glad you brought it up, because what it means is that the teacher has to use their teachers have to use their discretion. If I were that teacher, I would never bring up the cartoon that had already caused a lot of problem and is likely to cause a lot of problem ever. Because for them, for that particular religion, this was sacrilegious. It was just inexcusable. So you don't bring in a topic which is, controversial, which a lot of people don't agree with. Even people who are not religious will not agree with that. To making a cartoon out of, if you would you make a cartoon out of Buddha? Would you make a cartoon out of Jesus Christ? You would not. So, even if you did, maybe the Buddhist or the Christian would not get violent. But for them for a religion in which you do not have the right to have a picture of Muhammad, to put a cartoon is not the right thing to do in the first place. So this was insensitive of the teacher to bring that kind of thing. The teacher could have taught the same lesson by showing something else, because you don't want to put a red rag to a bull, because that that's going to be a bad thing. So so teachers have a very difficult position. They have to be very careful as to how they present their stuff. It was not the right thing to do for that particular teacher, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very important point that you bring up. On the other hand, also it becomes extremely difficult then in general also for society to actually, bring up some very difficult topics in general. It's, let alone religions, obviously, because also politicians, they usually do not have, because they want to get re-elected, actually address some very important and pressing issues in society. And so then ultimately, we have almost this difficult situation where we don't even talk, we don't even have the tools anymore to talk and have a dialogue with one another about some very sensitive topic, but nonetheless they are pressing. So what do you think? How could we foster to some extent dialogue within the school, for example, to open up spaces where people can exchange and have those difficult discussion that we need to have, whether it is right now or for the future?
Yeah, it's important for students to, one way of doing that is to discuss current events. It's to discuss current events and look at many possibilities of what is happening in society, because every day you have all kinds of things happening. And if they discuss them in class, rather than just follow the curriculum, I have to finish this math problem and I do math only. But math is related to society. And science is related to society. Social studies is related to all of these. They're all intersectional. So you need to talk about them. Maybe you can make a math problem out of a current situation, but you need to teach them about society. You need to teach them about how we are all related in different ways, how different people think differently. Why do they think differently? Because they will give you their rationale. They think, because many paths lead to Rome. So there are many ways of thinking about the same problem. One is not better than the other. We have to be careful that we are not, we are scientific, we are looking at facts and looking at things that we can prove, but sometimes they're not, they're emotional issues. So they have to be able to, in the classroom, have everybody pitch in and talk. And then perhaps weekly or monthly for the whole school to come together to talk, discuss something very important that happened in the world or happened in the community or happened in history. Canada has established a very good framework for an equitable society through legislation. It was the first country in the world, as most people know, to have a federal policy of multiculturalism, which was enacted in the Constitution, which is very not at all common and very unusual to have it in the Constitution. And Trudeau, when I first came to Canada, it was Trudeau, Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father, who was running. He was a more or less unknown politician. He was running for the top job on the slogan of just Canada must be a just society. And said that the just society will be a united Canada, united because all of its citizens will be actively involved in the development of a country where equality of opportunity is ensured and individuals are permitted to fulfill themselves in the fashion that they judge best. But that policy was not interpreted as an equality policy. It became translated into a song and dance routine where people talked about keeping their heritage cultures and their languages. And so it became something that was quite different than what was intended, I think, because a just society means equality of opportunity. And equality of opportunity does not come with songs and dances. So it was not till 17 years later that under a conservative government, Brian Mulroney enacted the policy of multiculturalism into a Multiculturalism Act. And then, of course, in between, they had other acts like Employment Equity Act and so on and so forth, so that the whole things became gradually more about equality and equal opportunity. But equal opportunity doesn't mean equal treatment, because if you treat people equally, they cannot be equal, because although the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says in Article 1 that human beings are born equal in dignity and rights. But we know that that's their they're equal in dignity and rights, but they are not born equal. They're born in different parts of the world. They're born to different religions. They're born to different socioeconomic groups, a different gender. So all these differences mean that they cannot be treated all the same. They have to be treated differently, and they have to be recognized as being different, because difference is not deficiency. Difference means that you are different, you look different, you might look different, but that doesn't mean you have different capabilities. So people who look the same can have different capabilities, but people who look different may or may not have different capabilities. It depends. So this Multiculturalism Act was good, and it attracted me, although there are a lot of, arguments against multiculturalism. It attracted me to study and spend a large part of my career trying to redefine multicultural education so that it was not just about cultures, it's about equality and a just society. So that's when I wrote 2 books. One was Redefining Multicultural Education, and the other one was Education and the Politics of Difference. Because when you are different, that is the basis of discrimination. That is the basis of inequality. And what is the politics there? And so several policies in Canada recognize multiculturalism as a fundamental characteristic of Canadian heritage and identity, and an invaluable resource in shaping Canada's future. But Canada has had a very racist history. Not only was it a colonial country, a colonized country where the colonizers settled here and were very bad to the indigenous populations, but its immigration history is very racist. And to bring Canada from that to equal kind of equality and just society is a big paradigm shift. And so in education, it was the same, because education was assimilationist, assimilate into the majority culture. But multiculturalism means that you keep your distinctiveness, but you are Canadian because you have equal chances to become whoever you want to in Canada. That was the ideal. So a shift from assimilation to multiculturalism was a paradigm shift in education. And it meant no discrimination, no prejudice, no stereotyping, no racism, no sexism, no ableism, no homophobia. All these things, were absolutely outside multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is critical. Multiculturalism is questioning why things are what they are, what we are now calling white privilege, questioning white privilege, questioning why things have been normalized that way. Is it right because it's the normal thing to do? No, it isn't. And why? Because we all need a chance. So this kind of situation was very important for the education, multiculturalism in education. But one of the big problems I had with this policy was that when multiculturalism policy came, and even now, the British and the French majority groups kept themselves out of the multiculturalism framework. They thought it was for those ethnics out there. and they were not part of it. But you cannot have an inclusive society if all are not included. So that the British and the French on the one side, and that is what we now call white privilege. Now we are questioning that. After the Black Lives Matter movement, the question has come, it's out in the open, that why are certain sections of people privileged at the expense of the other? And that we see that what John Porter wrote, that book, Vertical Mosaic, that some people had the privilege and some groups had the privilege, and that's why they were in this vertical mosaic. Some people were at the top, some groups were at the top in education, health, jobs, everything. They were good. And some people at the bottom, no education, no money, everything, lack of health and food and so on and so forth. So, but that has that changed in Canada? No. So when that doesn't change, there is this always this opportunity to do better, but we have to do that through education, because it is making economic insecurity. It's causing insecurity in people in many ways. So education is very much involved in developing that security for people, economic security. Now, you had asked me the question of why does ERC, why was it taken out, or why is it going to be taken out? It's not yet done. Why is it going to be taken out? Now, one of the reasons is that we are in a neoliberal world right now, where economic concerns have become the paramount goals of education. And because of that, education is focusing on job skills. They want to teach job skills. But if they do that at the expense of emotional development, emotional well-being, then we have a big problem, as we saw during the pandemic. Now, one thing that came out in the pandemic is that well-being has become a focus. Well-being of students, well-being of the general society, well-being of everyone. So many seminars are going on, webinars are going on how to enhance well-being, how to maintain well-being. The most importantly, in business, well-being is a very important thing, because they know that if workers are not well, they will have no business. They will not have profit. So when the economic thing comes, that's when it really matters. And so well-being in schools, we cannot focus on work skills at the expense of well-being, emotional, caring, empathetic society in school. As classrooms, we need to focus on care and concern and cooperation for others. And that kind of thing has come out in the pandemic, that we need to understand that we are not all by ourselves in this world. It cannot be only me. It has to be we. Because if I am not well, then we are not well. If one person out there is not well, I'm not well. I'm in danger. I'm not secure. So that kind of a problem is there when certain groups think they're not part of multiculturalism or multicultural policy. They think that why did I got a book yesterday. I ordered it. This is what does injustice have to do with me? And these are privileged white students who are being told that social justice is important, and they're saying, well, what does that have to do with me? I don't have a problem. I'm privileged. See? But if you're privileged, you're not going to be privileged for very long, because there's going to be problems in society. And one of them is this kind of pandemic. Well, let's say an earthquake. Look at what is happening in many parts of southern United States with these huge storms coming in. Everybody's affected, because there's no, the virus, for example, doesn't distinguish between those who are privileged and those who are not. A lot of privileged people are dying. I know a lot of my friends and the privileged classes in India are dying. Of course, they have the resources to live well, and the more affected are the ones who are not privileged. But they all are affected. Everybody's affected. So it's very, very important for us to understand the interdependence of people. And that's one thing we need to learn in school, that we are interdependent. Each country is interdependent on the other. That I cannot be by ourselves, cannot. You can stop the airports, you can stop flights, but the virus will still come. The virus does not know borders. It does not know social class. It does not know religion. It just attacks. So that's an indication of what multiculturalism should be about, that we are one human race and we are dependent on each other. We are infected through each other. We can have a peaceful society only if we agree with each other. Otherwise, we're not going to have peace in our societies. We're going to just kill each other. So we have a system, a framework in Quebec. Now, multiculturalism policy has another problem, and that is in education, it's a problem because it's a federal policy. And some of the provinces have taken it, some haven't. Because education is a provincial responsibility. So here, some of the provinces have accepted multiculturalism in their provinces. Some haven't. Two groups that haven't, right from the beginning, done anything, have rejected it. Not only not accepted it, but they have rejected it, is Quebec, because it came at a time of Francisization. And the Quebec was very, very involved after the Quiet Revolution in preserving its culture and language, because it's only 2% in North America, the population. They have to keep their culture, their knowledge, their language alive. And so they had to reject multiculturalism, because that would mean diluting the language and culture. Even though bilingualism was there, everybody naturally goes to English rather than to French. People who are coming in, even though they're taking, they have the right to take in immigrants who are French speaking, they're bringing them in. They know that there's a tendency to go to English because because of opportunities in English. And the indigenous groups have rejected multiculturalism because they said that we were here before you came in, before even the colonizers came in. So what are you telling us to do? So they didn't accept they rejected it, and Quebec rejected it. Quebec has interculturalism as a policy which is not enacted. They say it's a policy, but it has not, there's no act in legislative act, it's not in legislation. But they have a very good human rights bill, a Charter of Human Rights. Quebec does. And multiculturalism, when it's translated into education, it's helped now by postmodern theories, which question the meta-narratives of Europeans as applying to all people. And there are discourses of hybridity. All of these help redefine the critical aspect of multicultural education, so that it's more like anti-racist school policies which have been developed in Ontario and British Columbia, for example. And so despite its history of colonial settlement and racist immigration, and Canada is portrayed as a peaceful country which welcomes immigrants and works towards a just society. And more recently, the very dramatic welcome of 25,000 Syrian refugees added to that portrayal of Canada as a welcoming country, because it stood in stark contrast to the executive order that had been passed in the United States just before that, which barred people from Muslim countries, and including Syrian refugees, to come to the United States. So it was in stark contrast. So what's education's role in this? If students are getting multicultural education, which is aimed at a peaceful society, why are Canadian schools also still violent? Why is violence increasing as in the rest of the world? That's the question we have to ask. What are we doing as teachers and politicians and policymakers? How can we make this, it's secure? The basic concept of security is broad and basically refers to protection from harm, taken from the Latin word securitas, which is without care or anxiety. It means a condition of being secure. So it can be food security, it could be health security. We are talking about national security or security of space when we talk of extremism and terrorism, that like the one that blew up the Twin Towers in New York, or the many other things that are happening, that have happened in London and Paris in particular, but in other parts of the world also. So these are some of the things that are important for us in terms of education and security. And it was only in June 2018 that for the first time Canada added white supremacist neo-Nazi groups to a list of terrorist organizations. But all these people who are becoming neo-Nazis have been through Canadian schools. And what are we doing to preempt them from going there? That is the big question. And bullying in Canadian schools, so that the people go into gangs and things like that, they go into anti-social behavior. So that even when a few youth who have been educated and socialized in Canadian schools have turned to violent ideologies and become morally disengaged, it should be a matter of concern to Canadian policymakers and educators. And they rationalize their violent acts on moral grounds. Like I mentioned before, they try to make it morally acceptable. And once that paradigm shift occurs, that you accept it as morally justifiable, I can kill everybody because this is what they have done to my people. Because they can do that only when they develop a binary worldview, us versus them. A rift between in-group and out-group. I'm with my group, and if you're not with my group, you're the out-group. This moral stance is what makes it very difficult for education and educators to take a critical position and try to avoid the trigger factors, the push and pull factors which trigger them to do something wrong, to do something violent. And that is a very big challenge for educators, very, very big challenge. So let me conclude then by saying that despite the enduring discrimination and inequality that we have in Canadian society, Canada still ranks number 1 in inclusiveness among 25 countries, according to an Ipsos poll which was taken in 2018. Although we have a long way to go in various areas, especially for Indigenous groups. We have a long way to go. Canada has a long way to go. But there is a foundation of an inclusive society, is what I'm trying to say, through the legislations that have been enacted, and they act as a moral force and a guide to people and to social institutions. As Justin Trudeau said, Canada's commitment to diversity and inclusion isn't about Canadians being nice and polite. And then he said, though of course we are. In fact, this commitment is a powerful and ambitious approach to making Canada and the world a better and safer place. Diversity is our strength, is what his campaign slogan was, like his father before him. So finally, what I should end up by saying is that the soft power of education, rather than the hard power of expensive and reactive policing, can be most effective in making the world a more secure place. And education has a big role to play in that security, in achieving that security.
What made you interested in the emerging area of education and security?
Well, it relates to my work on multiculturalism. When I saw that people were still being marginalized and violence is increasing because of marginalization of certain students. And then I was invited to United Nations workshop on education and security. And from that, I got an invitation to do this literature review. And then when I did the literature review, I thought it is an extension of multiculturalism. That if we'd have critical multicultural education, we would not have these triggers, the push and pull factors. We can do something about it. We can make society better if we really are very interested in. And what we don't have is we don't take the theories in the Western world about education that have come from many of the philosophers in the South. Confucius, as early as the 6th century BC, talked about it. Rabindranath Tagore in India talked about inclusiveness and interdependence and the importance of humanistic education. And Paulo Freire, for example, the Latin American, we read a lot about him, but he talked about conscientization and how humanistic education, how vulnerability and the psychological impact of vulnerability was so important to him. And then, of course, we have the African philosophy of Ubuntu, which Nelson Mandela talked about a lot, which talks about community and interdependence. It's not that there haven't been Western educators who have talked about child-centered education. They have Rousseau, Dewey. They've talked about child-centered education, but the community involvement, the whole child, in terms of the whole community being involved in the child's education, the interdependence of nature with nurture, that importance comes through many of the Southern philosophies, but we don't think of them, we don't learn them, we don't take from them. So we need to, that is what made me interested, that we need to bring in more of those Southern philosophies into the Western world and see how we can change the focus on skills and cognition and competition and, ranking and that kind of thing. We have to make education a little more approachable, more fun for students. They have so much technology now. You have to challenge them in many more ways than we used to do before. So they have many things to attract them. You leave a child with a little computer or a little phone even, and they're okay. They can do many things to keep themselves occupied.
Your favorite book or author?
My favorite book, author is Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore from India. And I have many favorite books. I'd like one book in particular called The Discovery of India by Nehru, which I thought taught me a lot, because he was a very good, although he was trained in Cambridge in chemistry, he was a wonderful philosopher, and his writings were very, very interesting to me. And right now, I'm not reading anything except I'm going to start on this word. What does injustice have to do with me? Because I'm always, reading the stuff that I have to in order to do my publication deadlines, meet my publications and the requests that I have for the publications. So I haven't been reading much lately, but there is a book that I want to read called The Benevolent Democracy, which I've looked through and find it very, very interesting.
Your wishes for the future?
Peace, and I wish that we would give a scientific mindset to our students, so that they would not ask questions like, will my genes become different if I take the vaccine? They would not ask questions like that. They would say that I need to take the vaccine because I need to keep the world safe. So how do we get peace? We get peace by seeing that we all are well, healthy. We all have food to eat. We remove poverty from the world. We eradicated many diseases, but we have not been able to eradicate poverty. And that is the worst thing that can happen to people. So that is one thing I would like to see, eradication of poverty. And people just dying because they're poor and cannot eat.
Professor Ghosh, thank you so much. It has been great having you on our show. It's a great honor.
Thank you, thank you.
Ratna Ghosh.